Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Right, so first question then. So the first question today is, what is a millennial?
What's a millennial?
Yes.
Well, I'm a millennial.
Right.
So by definition, it's born between 1980 and the late 90s. And I guess the word that everyone associates with millennials is digital savvy, digital native, kind of all those things. Generation rent. And then you kind of get the other side where we're the me's, we're the I want it now. We kind of have grown up in this time where we're very lucky, we've had a lot of freedom.
A bit overconfident?
Perhaps a bit overconfident, kind of expecting everything. Everyone's told they're a unicorn, but not everyone can be a unicorn. So I don't know what you...
What do you think?
I definitely agree with that, but I also think that as I'm 18, so I'm under 20 years old, so I fit into Generation Z. So I'd say that millennials are, they're obviously, I see them as older than me in their 20s and in between 20s and 30s, and they're not necessarily as they're not, I wouldn't say the digital natives like some of my age who are just born with technology. I think, but they've adopted it early on, so they are tech savvy and they're, you know, fresh with the whole ideas and this whole new creative side of work, definitely.
All right, so let's pick another question. So let's pick this. I don't like that question. I'm going to pick another question. So not that one either. I'm going to pick one that I like.
I think it's...
Have you tailored these?
No.
They're all about you, Lydia. How brilliant you are. How you need a rise because you need more money. No, I like this one. Right. Are they different from any other generations, do you think?
I definitely think so. You know, as a younger person, I think they are more mature, obviously, but they're not necessarily as everything that I do involves technology, no matter what. Whereas there are some millennials who, you know, read books in coffee shops and, you know, kind of like this whole nostalgia of vinyls and things like that. But I also think there's almost a kind of gap in between X and millennials, where there are people from the older generation where they've been exposed to technology just as much as millennials. You know, they were in the
Zennials type.
Yeah, Zennials kind of word. So yeah, I think you're an example of that. You're very, you know, you'd be Generation X, but you're into technology and you're just as kind of knowledgeable as millennials are.
Get the Snapchat.
God.
What do you think, Frankie?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up Millennials, because I think it's also hugely affected by your job and your upbringing. So you can be a millennial and be a lot less tech savvy than a Zennial, as we're calling it. So I think that has a huge effect on kind of what area you work in as well.
Right. Okay. So last question then. So let's have a look at this one. So when we're designing products and services for you know, millennials, is there anything particular we can learn or that are kind of applicable to other generations or that we should pick up on, do you think?
I think this is a really good question, because we are the generation that we love to co-create, we love to be involved, and we have a huge social sphere of influence. So, you know, if something happens, for example, you know, if a company has anything that you ethically don't agree with, you know, you can see that immediately. Companies can't hide anything, and we are very critical of these kinds of things. So I think you can definitely, perhaps in a negative way, but you definitely have to consider that when you're designing your products and services.
Right.
In terms of a positive way, just use that creativeness, use that co-creation, and really just get them involved.
So isn't there something as well about being early adopters of technology, and actually where millennials go, then, you know, other generations follow. You know, even grandma now is on, you know, online banking and well, I guess
Some grandmas.
Some grandmas, but as the bank shut all their branches, I mean, she doesn't have much choice. But they do, you know, they've got the iPad and they're there and sitting there and looking at their kind of latest updates. And
I definitely think that millennials are sometimes doubted and maybe patronised in the workplace where...
What do you mean, darling?
Where they think, you know, they treat them like they're younger, and well, they are, but
well, that's enough of that.
as if that's a bad thing. So like, but this is the generation who really are the first ones to be tech savvy, and they're the ones with the creative ideas. And how you said about the whole generation rent, and whereas the other generations maybe have more money and they buy houses or I definitely think there's a new age of instant, everything's on your phone.
And the lending and...
Yeah, and it's easy to transfer money and things like that, and I think that's all part of this, and that will stay with us, I think, from until there's a new thing, and I think that the older generations have to kind of adapt to that to stay in the loop.
But do you not think though, if we're designing for millennials, and maybe sometimes there's a bit too much emphasis on millennials, and we don't think about grandma actually, we don't think about the older generations and whether or not they can adapt some of these things. And there is an argument that says there's a lot of emphasis on fintech products for young people, for millennials, but actually they're the ones that are renting. They don't have the investments, they don't have the cash. It's the older generations that do, and we should be devising products and services for those guys, because that's actually how we're going to make money or make things happen within organisations.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I know my parents get really frustrated. My dad in particular just is freaked out by most tracking technology, and I think with products being developed often by millennials for millennials, you do end up with that. Sure, we're the early adopters, we have to go that way. Perhaps you can argue that baby boomers and Generation X have to adapt, but I think you have to be sensitive to the speed of that and the abilities they have. I mean, my grandpa literally has no technology. He can build you a car, but he has no technology at all.
I wonder how many millennials could build a car.
Well, exactly. I mean, you go the other way. But if you shut all branches and force him to bank online, he's isolated. So I think it's a really important consideration.
But there are also things where there are organisations where you help the older generations. The millennials are even coming up with their own jobs where they help older people, adapt. So like in the Apple Store or something, you get these tutorials, and you always see maybe the older generations doing their, learning how to use a phone or how to do this and that. So I think that is starting, definitely, your point on being sensitive to it. But I do agree that we need to keep remembering about them, because we're in a kind of part of our lives where we're like, oh yeah, millennials are the future, we need to think about them. But I also agree that we're all in this together, and we do need to think about the other generations too, in that we can all adapt together to create a better future.
Well, as my grandma used to say, don't get old, darling. Cheers.
Cheers.